married and have lived here ever since. So do you want to share with us your story?
From my earliest memories, I lived in an imaginary world. So my mother would say to me, Isobel, can you go up? I've left something upstairs in the bedroom, can you go and get it? And so I would walk up the stairs, and then halfway up I became a princess, and I was an orphan, and so and sort of half an hour later I'd been playing this game and my mother would shout, Isobel, where are you, come down? So all my life I have been a bit of a dreamer, and loved books from a very early age. I was most fortunate that my parents were avid readers. I came from a very ordinary family, but loving parents who loved books and inculcated in myself, my brother, a love of books. We went to the library on a weekly basis. Books were very important. And I remember when I was about 7 or 8, getting so involved in a book that I couldn't stop reading it, and I could not see the words on the page because I was in the story and the writer was talking to just me, and I was seeing what that writer imprinted and painted on my mind, and from that I could never go backwards. So I've always thought about it as a magic door, that if you are a reader, someone who reads for pleasure, that door opens and you go through and you will never come out again, because you have then understood the magic that a writer can create. And it is a one-to-one, it's a very intimate relationship we have with books. When we read a book, we are in a very intimate relationship, because what the writer says to us, to me, is going to have a different effect than it would have to you, because you bring your life experience to any book, and the writer brings their life experience, and you're somehow meeting. So, when you go to a book group and you discuss books, you will all have a different opinion, and you will all imagine the characters different. And I'm sure we all have favourite books that we have been to see the film and are so disappointed because the main characters do not look like we would imagine. So anyway, I grew up, loved books, have always loved books, and then made the decision to come to Dubai in 1968. Dubai was a very small, a very different place, but it was a 12-hour flight on BOAC. It stopped 3 places, and then I came down the steps onto the sand, and there was a little warehouse with a corrugated iron roof, which was the supposed where you went through and found your luggage. And it smelt different. I'd never been outside of Europe, and I smelt the air, and it was spicy, and it was warm, and it was sandy, and I thought, gosh, this is lovely. So I went to my future husband's family house, and I was staying in the guest room, and the next morning, I'd arrived at sort of midnight, the next morning I opened the curtains, and it was December, and a little donkey trotted past the window, and I thought, gosh, I'm in heaven. And I can remember going to the Gold Souk and going to the creek, and I was just entranced, because when you have lived in a fairy tale most of your life, actually coming to a fairy tale was perfect for me. I was living in a house where none of the ladies spoke English, so I was in a great place to pick up Arabic very fast, because that's what I was hearing. And I know that hasn't been the experience for many people nowadays, so I was very lucky to be able to, within 6 months I was dreaming in Arabic, because I was hearing so much of it. And I was treated with such kindness by everyone I met, and I just felt this can be home for me. So then I started working at an infant school, and then I had my first child, and stopped working, and was frustrated by the fact that I couldn't find good toys easily, and I couldn't find any children's books. And I brought all my books with me when I came originally, so I've got all my childhood books and all my other books, and as many books as I could find in the house. I packed them, and they came by sea, so that that was for me a very important part of any home. So then it was a case, there were 2 things that were of concern to my husband and me. One was educating our children, giving them the best possible chances, and obviously books were important. So we were involved in co-founding the Al Ittihad private school, which was a bilingual school, so that children who went to it could have the best policy of education, but be and this was in 1974. So in that time, it was probably a revolutionary thought, because there were at that stage there was the English-speaking school. I think there was the American school, and there was one Indian school, and there were government schools. So there wasn't the wealth of schools or colleges or anything. There was no secondary schools for English-speaking children. Everyone had to go away to boarding school at 11. And in fact, I can remember meeting someone who'd been here before the English-speaking school had started, who'd been sent to boarding school at 6. I looked at my baby and I thought, no way, you're not going to boarding school. So you're often driven by necessity, your own necessity, your family necessity. So the school came out of that.
May I just intervene here, because you said the land was donated by His Royal Highness.
Yes. So my husband went to Sheikh Rashid and said, we have this idea. So he donated the piece of land in Hamria, and he gave and he paid for the architect, and he gave 12 million dirhams, which was a lot of money then, to build the school. There was a board of trustees. So again, it was set up as a not-for-profit in that time. So there was a board of trustees, and people donated money from banks, from private individuals. So it was a sort of a different idea. And then realised that there was nowhere that sold educational toys, and so we'd finished the school. I then had 2 children, and so I thought, well, maybe it'd be a good idea to open an educational toy shop. Now, I had no experience of business at all. I'd been a teacher, and that was it. But I had lots of books on my shelves, and I obviously knew about toys. So I phoned up the British Embassy, the commercial section, and said, can you send me, please, a list of all the toy suppliers, and I gave them the names. They provided all those addresses. I looked in all the books I had, and I found the address of all the main publishing companies, and I wrote to them and said, I'm setting up a business. I want to import your toys. Please send your catalogues. I chose all the things. Then I thought, well, how am I going to get it to Dubai? I mean,
now you had some interesting experiences with regard to the books that you brought from England. With regard to supply chain and logistics, you said that first it came in a container and then you moved to air shipments. So
yes.
How did that happen? I mean, that was quite a trajectory of sorts.
We used to have several containers a year, so there was no chance really of having bestsellers, because you just had to sort of stick mainly with classics or new books, but you couldn't move fast to keep up with trends of what was best-selling or what was in demand.
Right.
But then we moved to air freight. It was getting, because there was so much coming into Dubai, a lot of fresh produce, so we were able to benefit from lower freight rates and started to import. We would still have containers bringing the sort of the bulk of classics that you would always want in a bookshop, but then it was, we were able to tap into what was bestsellers. But we didn't start up as a bookshop, we started up as a toy shop, because I had no experience. And in 1975, shops were very defined by what they sold. So you're a butcher or a baker. A toy shop or a bookshop, you didn't mix the things, although now it's very common, but then it wasn't. And so I didn't really know this, so what I thought was that in a good toy shop, you must have children's books. I didn't think that wouldn't be the case. And so that's what I did. But then parents would come in and say, well, have you got mother and baby books? And then they wanted cookbooks, and then they wanted fiction. And I thought, this is ridiculous. We'll just open a bookshop. And I was actually very happy. But children's books were at the heart of the toy shop, of the bookshop, because that's where I'd started. And I felt, and I still feel, that that is probably the most important part of any bookshop, because you see the joy in children being let loose in a bookshop or in a library and having the freedom to choose the sort of books they like, and sitting on the floor, sitting on a beanbag and sort of flicking through the pages and saying, yes, Mum, this is the book I want to take home and read. So,
so there is a remarkable story. Yesterday, I had a student who was working in Emirates MBD now. She comes and says, you know what, I really wanted to meet Isobel because it is Isobel who made me start loving books when I was a small child living in Jumeirah. That was where your store was. You used to be there, and you would make sure that you guide each young child who comes in to the books that they might like to enjoy reading. So she was a very small child at that time. Her father was the Consul General here. and she came in, and Isobel apparently took out a book, and I don't remember the name, I think she would definitely be meeting you, and said that perhaps you might want to try this, and then you know, so that individual attention that was given to the young child, and that really created an impact. So was that very, where did that, is it because of your own love for reading, and you know, when you stated that reading gives you you know, a space of empowerment, because you can be whoever you want to be if you're reading. So you wanted to inculcate that within the anybody who came in.
I just feel that it is our right, it is our duty to get as many children hooked on books, because it has been statistically proven, there has been so much research worldwide about children who read for pleasure on a regular basis will outperform their peers when everything else is equal if they read for pleasure regularly through the rest of their lives, through their careers, through whatever they do, they will do better. Now, as a parent or as a bookseller or as whoever you are, it's not a lot to ask to get children reading for pleasure. And from babies onwards, you know, there is nothing more satisfying for me than to see a little child on its mother's knee, on its father's knee, on aunties, sisters, whatever, enjoying a book together. It's warm, it's imaginative, and it's sharing something that's very special with a child. And any child who's given the right experience will love a book. You've got to find the right book. It is actually, there is no set book that will suit all children. And that's what I used to find fascinating in the bookshop, was trying to find the right book for each child. And you know, even with I've now got 3 grandsons, and again, they've got very different tastes, and it's fascinating to see which books they will hook onto and want you to read time and time again, because something in that book is talking to them.
Yeah. So this little store then expanded into something really big. It went on to become Magrudy's. So how did that happen? How did this growth happen? Because there were many stores, then you had many stores, and then
what I found was, I can't even remember exactly how, but in my sort of, I think I used to get, it was a trade magazine called The Bookseller, and in there I saw an advert for software which ran bookshops, and I was then quite interested because, and that was in the 80s, really when I suppose people were starting to think more about software that would assist in businesses. So when we went back to England, I made an appointment to go along and get a demonstration of how it would work. And it was absolutely fantastic because you paid a fee to get Nielsen's book bank. So Nielsen AC Nielsen is a company that captures all the ISBNs. So at any one time, there would be 3 million books in English in print. And this data, they capture it. You know, publishers pay, obviously, a fee to them. But for a bookseller, it is a goldmine, because you can then find immediately a book, if it's in print, who the publisher is, what kind of format is it, a hardback, a softback, what the cost is, and whether it's available with a wholesaler. So with this, we were able to offer a customer ordering service for any book in print. So I found that it was quite difficult over the years. We started to sell Arabic books, and whilst there was a good number of Arabic books for adults, children's books tended to be not very good quality. The illustrations were not so good. They were printed on cheap paper. And it just, when you put them in the bookshop and then you compared them with books that were in English, it seemed that we were actually shortchanging children who were reading in Arabic. So in my ignorance, I thought, well, I'm a bookseller. I could be a publisher. Why not? So I set up a children's publishing company, to publish books for children who were from or lived in the region. So it was in English and in Arabic, and we published them as separate editions, but in both languages. And then I quickly discovered that actually publishing is incredibly technical, and I'm not technical, so that was a challenge. but I did have all the sort of experience of being a bookseller and knowing the kind of books that would sell, because you develop a taste for what's going to be a bestseller, what books look good, and what your customers want. And of course, we've got the software database. We knew we were able to track bestsellers that would be different to bestsellers in other regions. So that, again, was interesting. We were able to sort of see which books had been in demand, or that you would get sort of these blips and you'd wonder why, and then you'd find that book groups were doing them, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So, with 2016 pronounced as the year of reading by the country's leaders, now Emirates Airline Festival of Literature is in its 8th edition.
Yeah, it's going into its 9th now.
Yes, yeah. And
so it was just a chance conversation. I was in my office. A bookseller was passing through Dubai on his way to India, stopped and had coffee. And the companion who was travelling with him said, "Oh, does Dubai have a literary festival?" I said no, and he was the nephew of Christina Foyles, of Foyles Bookshops in London. And we got talking, and we just said, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if there was a festival here?" And I went home from the office, and I had a ladies' lunch, and it was artists and writers. And one of the ladies there said, "Gosh, this must have been like the lunches at Christina Foyle, of Foyle's Bookshop." She was legendary for having these lunches every so often. And I said, "Oh, it's really funny you say that, because I've just been with her nephew. He was passing on his way to India, and we were talking about, wouldn't it be great if Dubai had a literary festival?" 2 or 3 days later, I got a letter from her saying, "That was a lovely lunch. Thank you. Enjoyed, meeting all these people. Why don't you pitch this idea to Emirates Airline?" If I hadn't have got that letter, I don't think it would have gone anywhere. That would have potentially been the end of it. But I then had the incentive to. She was the wife of the vice chairman of Emirates, so I thought if she said, "Why don't you pitch it?" perhaps there was a chance. So I went along and pitched it, and I had never been to a literary festival, so I really only had in my mind what I thought a literary festival should be, which was, in hindsight, I think was a good thing, because I was able to colour it with all the colours of my Dubai experience and what I thought was important. And one of the things that was really important for our literary festival was the children's programme there, that we would put that right at the heart of the festival, that we would have simultaneous translation in every session so that language would never be a barrier between Arabic and English, and that we would have free education days as part of the festival. And I discovered, consequently, that these were unique things that other festivals were not doing. They were doing lots of brilliant things. But had I been to another literary festival, I'm sure I would have thought, "Oh, they know what they're doing, I better do it like that." So that was, and whilst I'd never been to a literary festival, I did have 35 years by then, experience of being a bookseller, having all the contacts to the publishers, and obviously the publishers have the contacts to the writers. And I also knew what readers were reading, what readers liked, what was popular. So I had all of that experience. Without that, I couldn't have done it, for sure.
So, a remarkable story, yes?
Yeah, of course.
Now tell us something about you as a person. I mean, when you share this story, it's seamless. It's almost as if this is so easy. This is what I was born to do.
I think I was thinking about this. I did at A-level, I did English literature, obviously, but I also did history, and I studied Queen Elizabeth, and I was just so in love with Queen Elizabeth I, and her amazing ability to be a life changer, to be a country changer, to be so inspirational, a woman in that time. And you sort of, you I suppose, somehow or other, you think, well, I never felt that I was a female, or, that I was in any way less capable than a male. I always have felt that men and women are different. There's no problem with that, but we're all human beings. And that it never occurred to me that because I was female, I couldn't do anything. That thought had never entered my head. It did occur to me things like, well, I couldn't win a race because I'm a hopeless runner, or I'm never going to be able to play tennis particularly well, because I knew I couldn't. But it wasn't because I was female, it was just that I was rubbish at those things. But if you choose to get involved in something that you are passionate about, generally with passion comes experience, that you have invested time in that. And I had invested a lot of time in reading because I loved it, and it was, you know, it was something that gave me so much pleasure, and I had a good feel for it. I was able to really get to the heart of books often, and I would pick up things that I know when we had discussions in college and things like that, other people didn't. So it was, you know, it was obviously I did have a feel. I just think, you know, literature, books and I clicked, and I was aware of that. I also had an innate belief in my own abilities to do things, and it was often misplaced. I have had lots of failures in life, but when something goes wrong, all you've got to do is actually ask yourself, why did it go wrong? Could you have put it right? Could you have done it better? And then you move on, and you either try it again, or you say, that was, and I'm, you know, perhaps known for spectacular success, but I also am very good at spectacular disasters, so I don't do anything in half measure. And don't be frightened of failure. You know, I took my driving test 3 times, and in fact, I had the same instructor. The first time, I think I had a tick. I was just 17. I'd had 6 driving lessons. How ridiculous was that? And every single box except one was ticked that I'd done something wrong. Second time, I only got 3 ticks, and then I had the same examiner the 3rd time round, and I think he was so impressed at my progress that even if I got something wrong, he was going to pass me. So, you know, failure is something we should not be frightened of, and we should look at, you know, if you fail, just get up, learn from that and move on and say, right, I'm sure I can do it better. But I also think as women, we have to move on from saying, poor us, we're female, we don't get a chance. That's not true.
That's right. So Isobel's leadership quote, which captures all of that, if I may just share it so that it kind of gets, you know. So Isobel says, each one of us can be a leader. First and most importantly, it's a belief in our ability to achieve what we set out to do. Second, determination to succeed and the staying power to overcome failure. Thirdly, accept that failure is a necessary part of that journey and offers essential learning opportunities. Lastly, choose to champion something you're passionate about. It'll never be a job, it'll always be a joy. So that's well applaudable, isn't it? Now, you've said your motto, in fact, you often, in our conversations, you often you know, shared with us that failure is a definite part of success. But a lot of time, we are not able to take risks because of our high fear of failure. Now, how do you think you developed this capability to not have that fear at all? Did it have anything to do with the messages that you got in your own childhood, or in the way you were growing up, your own attitude towards life and the way you experimented or explored every opportunity as a... How did that develop? It does not develop in a day or two. So if you were to unpack as to... you do not have any fear of failure from what you're saying. So how did you reach?
No, because if you believe you're doing the right thing, and if you fail, it means you've not got it quite right, but actually you still believe where you're going, and you still believe it can be achieved. I mean, if I was going to climb Everest, which I'm not, I might not make it on the first time, but I would come back and think, you know, I didn't have enough, I didn't do enough training at base camp or whatever, and then you would try again. And I think if you speak to anyone who has been an entrepreneur, that they will have had lots of failures. And one example, At Magrudy's we used to sell all sorts of things, and the thing that I hated but was essential was haberdashery. I have no love of haberdashery, but we were asked for it. People would come in and say they expected Magrudy's in the early days to stock anything they couldn't find. So we had to do, you know, knitting wool, needles, etc., which I hated. But I had to do it. You don't always in your job get to do what you love, but you know, I had most of it that I loved. And so I was ordering aero zips from a company. It was in the days of telex, and I'd sent out a telex with the order. And then I got a long distance phone call the next week from Aerozip saying, thank you so much for your order. We will be putting our factory on full production for your order next week, the order for Dubai. And I was thinking, you know, I've ordered about maybe 7 dozen zips. What in the world is this? And obviously I had got something completely wrong in the multiples, and thank God he phoned up. Even with that, even though I sort of cut down, we had those zips for a long, long time. So you know, it is easy to make mistakes too. But that made me very, very careful about double checking, because I'd made the mistake and it could have been very expensive.
Yeah. So you are a change maker. You have continuously challenged status quo. For you, I was hearing the language in your own sense-making process. It was always, when you landed here, for example, in a completely alien country, first time traveling out of UK, and you found it fascinating that you found the fragrance around you fascinating. You found the donkey outside your window fascinating. So your entire approach to life seems to be very driven, of course, by a certain awe and wonder, which you seem to have retained over a period of time, which is really fascinating because it comes through in everything that you're saying, that, wow, that was a great opportunity. So it's a very solution-centered kind of an approach that you have towards life. And that in itself, do you think that is what has kind of propelled you to take risks? Because for you, a risk is essentially an opportunity. It's not a challenge.
Yeah, I am a risk taker. I would say I quite like the thrill of taking a risk. There is something. I'm not a gambler, thank God, but there is, because I know I would lose money, so I won't do it. But there is something quite exciting about taking a risk. But one thing I've always found is I have to trust my gut instinct. Yeah, as females, we definitely have a gut instinct. It is something that we should never discount, because the times when I've thought I should do something and then someone would say, you know, with all reason and logic, well, you shouldn't do it because of this and this and this, and I would listen, and lo and behold, I would make the wrong decision. And gut instinct is based on your experience, your knowledge, all of those things. It's not just an airy-fairy thing. And as, you know, with each experience you have, you gain that. So now I am an absolute believer in trusting my gut instinct, because it's not based on nothing. It is based on your life experience. Things I haven't said is that I believe I'm a team player, and I think that is hugely important, that you can be part of a team. And, you know, I have always had and been blessed by working with marvellous teams, and that is a joy as well, that you gather people around you who are like-minded, who share the same passion and vision that you do, and that you know, you share that journey with them, because it is always a journey. But that is a very important part of the journey. It's a very important part that you don't try and achieve things on your own, because you will never succeed without team, you know, a great team with you.
So what would you say are your key strengths as a leader?
Sense of humour, I think, is very important. That I think I love team meetings where we have lots of laughter, because when we laugh, we're happy and life seems livable. So even when you're in your darkest hour, it's very important to be able to find something funny. The other thing is I try and inject people with if they don't have it, but most of them do, but inject them with the passion that I feel about things, help them to understand why it's so important, that we, all of us, have the ability to make the world a better place. Even if it's only getting one child to like books, that is really important because their lives may be better because of that. So it doesn't matter whether you aim to change 1 million people's lives or you aim to change one person's life, at least try and do that. You know, we're all here. I love life. I think, you know, every day is a new day with new excitement. You meet new people, there's new challenges, and take opportunities. Don't just say, oh, well, I haven't got this, I haven't got that. You know, if an opportunity presents it, just grasp it and try. You've got nothing to lose except, you know, that opportunity.
So one is, of course, from you know what you're saying, there is a lot of agency involved in what you've been doing. You know, it's driven by your own self-awareness as to what you are good at and what you're passionate about. So if you were to give some mentoring here to all the audience here, how do you go about developing leadership capacity? Because you've already stated that leadership does not necessarily have to do with occupying a certain position. It's about creating an impact, you know, in a meaningful fashion. And every one of us have a responsibility, in your view, to create that impact in whatever ways, even if it's just one person whose lives are being changed. But how do you go about developing your leadership capacity? What are your key learnings that people can take away from you?
To love others. So, you know, love meeting people, love the opportunities you can find in just, you know, having friendships with people that you meet, exchanging ideas, joining book clubs. Leadership, I don't know what really defines. I think leaders come in all shapes and sizes, and you have to find your own style. Everyone will, you can't fit into a mould. You have to find your way of putting your point across. I do not think that you can be a leader unless you are the hardest working in your team. So, you know, if you expect your team to put in long hours, to go that extra mile, you can't expect it unless you yourself are doing even a bit more. So I think that, you know, then you gain respect because you're not asking anyone to do something you yourself are not doing. So I would say that's really important. And I also believe as a leader you should understand the nuts and bolts of what you're doing. So when I was setting up the business with my husband, I did every bit of it, you know, from ordering to arranging the deliveries to designing how the shop looked to, you know, purchasing the tills. So, you know, understanding each part of it. So not to just come in at the top and think, I don't need to know how it all works. I think it's quite important you do know from the bottom up because then you will understand when things are going wrong. You know, if you've had that experience, you will start to see, my goodness, that can't be right. You will notice it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to, you know, it is very good for any entrepreneur to start right at the bottom, to do every sort of, you know, so if you were setting up a restaurant or a cafe, you should be aware how you know, put ingredients together, about all the health and safety. If that is what you want to do, don't just think that you can have an idea, employ people, and it's going to work. Unless you put your own self, your own spirit, your own heart in it, it won't quite be as good as it could be.
Mm-hmm. And in your own journey as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur, as a cultural ambassador, you have, of course, you know, met with so many different people. Now, how would you, for a young person who's starting out, I mean, I see some of my students here, how do you start building those networks? Because I've often seen a lot of young people, they're very reticent and they go about it in a very, it's a mechanical kind of a way where you know, come and you share cards, and that's really not networking, is it? I mean, how do you go about developing sustainable networks over a period of time?
That's a difficult one. Networks are hugely important. But you can't just say, wake up today and say, I'm going to build my network, because that's not how it happens. Yeah. It is much more about building sustainable friendships. So a lot of friendships are made at the school gate when you've got young children, that you, or you're part of a book group, or mother and toddler groups, or you go to the gym, you know. So there's all these places where there are networks. And I would say, in the Middle East, in this region, networks are hugely important because if you look at the local community, it's a small number, but everyone is virtually related to everyone else. And for me, being part of that community has been hugely important as well, because no matter where I go, I meet a family member. You know, that's how it is. And I've been here a very long time, so they obviously all know me, and that's a family network, a wider family network, and then friends, children's friends, you know, the generations of children that I've known now in different positions. And if you are a people person, you will do that naturally. You don't build networks, it just happens naturally. And it's always important to value people throughout your life, not because, oh, they're in a position, because you might meet them when they're a little child, and then...
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So the authentic relationships that you need to
Yes.
build. Now, when we look at data, Isobel, there is now there is a lot of talk on how do you create gender equity at the workplace, for example. Across the world, when we look at, there was a recent study which found that even in America, out of the public listed companies, there are only 5% women in board positions. Now, despite being a democratic country for so long, and across the world, except for Nordic countries where there is some equity, rest of the world, the majority of even the developed parts of the world, the equity is far from being reached. And according to the Human Development Report, it will take more than 100 years to close the gender gap. Now, what do you think limits women from reaching the positions where, you know, the critical mass at the top? What more needs to be done in order for us to create a critical mass at the top?
Ourselves.
How do you do that?
Well, I think it's ourselves that we limit ourselves. That if we don't have, that somehow we grow up, whether it's society, whether it's our parents, whether it's just what, you know, messages that we pick up, that actually that's not for women. And so I think it is self-limiting. And at the last festival, we had the Canadian astronaut, Chris Hadfield, who was so inspiring. He spoke to nearly 1,000 students. And what he said was that when he was 9 years old, he woke up that morning and something was impossible. By that evening, he had seen on television a man land on the moon. So what was impossible in the morning was possible that evening. And he decided at 9 years old he was going to be an astronaut. And it took him 21 years, and he got there. And many of the questions that were asked of him after his talk came from girls. They said, how did you manage to achieve what was impossible? And he said, nothing is impossible, you have to believe that. And that was his message, that many females think that they can't achieve something. They limit themselves. And I was having a conversation with someone who's going to speak to a group about empowering, it was a group of students empowering women. And I said, one fact you can give them, 100% true, that 0% of men can bear children. So there we go. That's the truth. That is the truth. And I feel very sorry for men that they will never have that experience that we can have if we choose to have it. So I've always thought, I'm sorry, that we were superior. And that's wrong. And it's wrong to feel we're superior. We're not. We are just different. There are men and women, we're human beings. And it's never crossed my mind that as a female, that I would have any less chance than a man. And because it's never crossed my mind, it's never been an issue for me.
There are these prescriptions, gender prescriptions, as we are growing up. That you know, it's like buying that pink doll for a girl and buying that blue automobile for the boy. So the gender prescriptions are essentially programming each one of us to get conditioned that, oh, this cannot be done by me. And there is a certain reticence as we are growing up.
One thing that, as I was talking to this doctor who's going in to do that tomorrow, I said one thing that I'm so glad my parents didn't do is that as a little girl, I wanted to be a boy. So I couldn't bear wearing dresses. And I have got photographs of me. I was a scruffy, I always wanted short hair. And I used to wear these horrible tracksuits and T-shirts. And if someone said to me, Sunny, oh, I was over the moon. And my parents never bothered. They didn't try and make me wear pretty dresses, or they were not bothered at actually how I looked, because they just loved me for who I was. And I think, again, that is something that nowadays, even more so, there is an expectation of women that you have to, you know, from when they're little girls, that they've got to be thin and they've got to dress like this and, you know, plastic surgery and God knows what else. And that is an awful pressure on females, that they have that, they look at these magazines, which are obviously airbrushed and messed about with, that those are not real people. But that is the message that we as a society are giving them all the time.
Some spaces are excluded for women, and it is very visible, especially in the corporate sector. Now, how do you reclaim spaces? If you were to you know, give some of your own insights on how do you influence people who might not see the world the way you would like them to see? What is a mechanism by which, because at the end of the day, it's all about negotiating, it's all about creating collectives, but then you're also trying to manage the relationships in a way that nobody gets threatened so that we can move forward together. So how would you do that?
I think by respecting everyone that you're dealing with. I think respect earns respect. So if you respect people, if you respect, I never really felt I wanted to change anyone. That wasn't part of my thing. But because I was treated with such affection by all my family, by everyone I met, I never faced in any way any type of, oh, you're a woman, therefore you can't do this or you can't do that. So I think we must respect others, and then you gain that respect. And then, you know, through time, people will understand that women are not a threat. You know, why do people exclude women? It's because they want to keep them in a certain area where they can control them, and that they feel there'll be a threat if they let them. Yeah. So if we don't offer that threat, and I don't think a woman should become a man to get the power.
And you have built a legacy. You've always wanted to build a legacy.
I wanted to always feel that you leave the world slightly better than when you came. I think all of us should try and strive for that. You know, whether we plant a tree, whether we, you know, pass on our recipes, whatever we do. There's so many things that we are all skilled at doing, and just try and make the world a better place.
I have we had a conversation just before we started, and while I did say final thoughts, I was just remembering that now what has happened recently is that, and I think post-Thatcher maybe, that the entire education system, even the corporates, we've become highly, you know, drawing from the neoliberal ideology that everything is a means to an end. Knowledge in itself is of value only if it leads to maybe a job or a career. So the cognitive, in other words, has significance only if it adds value to the commercial, if you know what I mean. So, and over a period of time, sometimes educational institutions we are no longer investing in, you know, the arts, the literature, philosophy, some of those value-building streams, because everything is about industry linkages for a job, internships. Let us try and, you know, provide courses which can help them build a career. And it is a very, very means to an end kind of a relationship. So what is the responsibility that you have? So we are moving more and more away from the value-based education of education being an end in itself.
But the thing is that literature, all of the literature makes us creative. Yes, so yes. To be an entrepreneur, to be a good business person, if you're not creative, you're not going to have those ideas. You're not going to have those sparks that suddenly occur to you. Why don't we do this? What about this? You know, I mean, we had just one small example. Every year at the festival, we used to take the authors out on a trip to the desert, and they would ride camels and do things like that. And every year, I never got to go. And I felt, because I had to stay back at the festival and make sure everything was going. And I thought, you know, the only way I'm ever going to get out to the desert with them is if we do an event, we take the audience out then. And so in the third year, that's what we did. And we started an event in the desert. We drove all the audience there, drove all the authors there. And now we have this unique event, which no other literary festival in the world has, Desert Stanzas, whereby we sit on cushions under the stars, and we have poetry in different languages, and it's magical. But that was a selfish desire that I just wanted to go and have the desert experience with the authors. So what literature, what philosophy, what reading does, wider reading, memoirs. I'm reading at the moment The House in the Sky by Amanda Lindholt. She was held hostage in Somalia for over a year, and she had the most terrible experiences. And it's a harrowing memoir. But what she means by the house in the sky is where she put herself when things were so bad and so dark. She would imagine herself in this house in the sky, and she would look at all her lovely memories of her travels and her families and things like that. So it was, her mind was out of her body. So her body might have been suffering, but she was in another place. And that is really where books take you.
Which is a very empowering, you know.
So don't think, you know, to be a rounded person, the more you read, the more you can experience, even secondhand, other people's inspiration, other people's joy and misery, imagination. You know, you can feel that you've been to space. You can understand what it would be like to be in a book that's about science fiction. You can read some of the best scientists in the world, and they have written and given you a glimpse of what, you know, their enormous genius is able to show. So I think reading empowers and enriches and gives us that opportunity to be more creative, because we are able to tap into the greatest minds going back across centuries.
Mm-hmm. And a woman who has multiple responsibilities at home, who has a career, one of the challenges that people often say, I'm thinking, you know, supposing there is somebody out there who's thinking, but I don't have the time.
You don't. You can't have it all. You can't have it all.
I was just going to come to that, but can you have it all? Yes.
You can't.
Yes.
You can't have it all. And why should you have it all?
Yes.
I don't think that's right to think you can have it all.
Yes.
Life is about making choices, but we have a choice in what we choose we want to do. And I think you, again, should decide what is most important to you. And for me, I have to put always, I would say, the family has to be most important above everything else.
So thank you so much for sparing the time.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.